there's something really powerful about grief and transformational about grief and giving it the front and center stage that it deserves and it needs.
Mm-hmm.
How can we then, once we realize and we accept that we have these deep reserves of grief that at this point are getting stagnant in people and creating, starting to go into something like complex grief is what we call it,
Yeah.
but it becomes very toxic. And then I think a really dangerous thing is people start accepting this is just this. I hear it. I hear it everywhere. This is just the new way of living. This is just the new normal. And I completely disagree that it doesn't have to be that way. Can
No.
you guide us through the process of how to digest that grief and how to use it as a catalyst for profound healing and transformation?
Welcome to the Reframe, from the couch to the conversation, where we dive deep into the human experience of healing and transformation, giving you the knowledge, skills, and resources to not only manage the increasing stress of the world, but center you into your sense of self so you can be the change you want to see in the world. I'm your host, Rebecca Molman, trauma therapist turned coach. Today, we are talking with Suzanne Jabour, a certified grief educator, transformational coach, and workshop leader who has found meaning in her loss through opening up conversations about grief, how it really works, and how we can support people during that experience. She works with grievers to chart their unique grief path. She also works with people, organizations, and businesses to build the skills and protocols to better support people who are grieving and normalizing grief as an expected and healthy part of our lives. Grief is something that we all experience in different moments of our life, and it's a very uniquely individual process. Our conversation today takes us deep into the anatomy of grief and the grief process, the role that curiosity has in getting us through the overwhelm of grief, how to navigate brain fog in a multi-step process, unpacking grief that we all experience in our own unique way with the last couple of years with COVID, and how to apply a growth mindset when processing grief. Something that I found incredibly important in this conversation was how to best support somebody that is grieving, whether it's a loved one or a friend or even a coworker. There are certain things that work better for a grieving person that we don't normally pivot towards and oftentimes feel uncomfortable around. You'll find a wonderful download in the episode notes that Susan has created just for you. And it outlines the symptoms of grief. And some of them just might surprise you. This is a great thing to print out and just have on hand, whether you or a loved one might be struggling to process loss or a significant life change. Grief is an incredibly powerful ally, and Susan shines a much needed light on the process and the tools to navigate this grief process in a very down to earth, straightforward, no lace kind of way. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce Suzanne Jabour.
Susan, it's absolute wonderful pleasure to have you here today. And I have really been looking forward to this episode because it's around grief. And I think it's a topic that doesn't get enough attention and is really a misunderstood process that we all experience. I don't think we can get out of this life without experiencing on one level or another grief. And just not just understanding grief, but how we can use grief as a leverage point for healing and transformation and what it looks like on the other side. So I would love for you to just say hello and maybe share a little bit about your own story on how you've come to deeply move to work with people, not only on a personal level, but also in a working capacity, navigating the grief journey.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm so grateful to you for opening up this conversation. I'm with you. I think it's so important. And it's a topic that for some reason we're just all scared of and we don't want to talk about. And I don't know if we think it's contagious and if we talk about it, it'll happen or what it is, but we don't want to talk about it. So, and we need to. So I'm so grateful that you're opening up this space and so happy to be here, even though I know that sounds really weird when what we're talking about is grief. I came to be a grief educator and be on this mission after the death of my son, Ben, in September of 2020. He was 22. And as you would expect, that loss absolutely rocked my world. I'm very grateful. And, so much about how we language grief sounds weird. So I'm going to say I'm grateful it was not my first experience with the loss of someone really close to me. My dad died when I was in my 30s and my mom died when I was in my 40s. So I had been through the loss of a close family member before, and it still didn't equip me for what was going to happen to me, at me, through my entire life when Ben died. And it's so interesting because I think because we don't talk about it and because each time we experience it is different, a lot of the time we're kind of surprised by what happens to us. So even though I knew that this loss was going to completely upend my life and I was completely shattered, like I could envision myself and my life in pieces on the ground. And my arms were full of pieces already, so I couldn't pick any more up. And I had no idea how to put these random pieces of myself and my life back together to make something new because the old life was gone. And so I was then having to make something new. And I knew almost instantly in those very, very early days, I just got the message that I needed to be conscious and curious. So that became for me really a commitment to feel it all, to live it all, even though it's horrifying and devastating. And, the curiosity in those early days literally was about like, when I'm sobbing this hard that I can't catch a gasp of air, how do I breathe? Like those moments where you're just curled up in a ball on the couch and you can't do anything but sob. So that was that idea was, okay, I'm not going to be able to be unconscious to any of the experience. I was going to actually purposefully embrace it because I just had a knowing that if I didn't, it was going to destroy me, that I wouldn't survive it. And to just be curious about like, what is life next? How do I get through today? How do I do this? How do I make a phone call to a random company that I need to close accounts because my son died? Like, how do I say that over and over again to strangers? It's so overwhelming. And so, your brain is knocking regularly into this reality that feels unreal. And the cognitive dissonance, the brain fog, like it's a lot. And I just knew for me, the other thing I realized early on as I started to share what was happening with me, I started just writing on Facebook to share with friends and family because I had to get the spin out of my head. And the feedback I got from people was that it was so helpful to them that nobody in their world was talking about grief. They didn't really know how it worked. It's easy to understand with a catastrophic loss like mine, in this strange hierarchy of grief that we have, there's something about loss of a child that puts you kind of way up there, that there was something about this experience that people could learn from to get through the griefs that they were going to face or that they were already facing. And that really set me down a path of realizing that this terrible thing happened and I'm not going to let it be for nothing. And if by sharing my story, if by educating myself, because I have that capacity and that curiosity for my own healing, as well as to help others, if I can share all of that and help to normalize grief, to have it be something that's not, mysterious and scary and isolating and unfathomable, then something positive will have come out of this. And I am not someone who thinks things happen for a reason, or, people say, oh, this will make you stronger. I'm like, you know what? I was strong enough already. I didn't need to build more character. I didn't need this to happen as a catalyst for my personal growth, but it did happen. And so I had a choice to make about what I was going to do next. And Ben also was a person who lived a really big life. He was a big personality, joyful, and, had all kinds of struggles and lived a really big life. And I didn't want my life to be lessened in its ability to be big and expansive and interesting because I had faced this loss. So it honors him as well.
Mm. Well, thank you for having the courage and openness to go through that process. So you can be here guiding us and the listeners through the anatomy of what it looks like. And then also, I think the anatomy might be a little bit different than the actual process. Could you walk us through the
Mm.
anatomy of grief a little bit?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I think one of the things that happens in grief is there are absolutely symptoms. I call them symptoms. I don't know if that's the right languaging, but there's things you can expect to happen both physiologically, emotionally, that kind of become your focus because for me anyway, they were a little bit shocking and surprising. So part of the goal is that, if we can talk about them and say, here's 8 things that may or may not happen to you with some level of severity at some point in your grieving, then when they happen, we're not so surprised. So for
Mm,
me, the biggest one that was a surprise was the brain fog. And what that meant for me was, it's interesting. And I was just thinking back to those early days. I had a massive inability to access words.
mm,
And I'm a pretty eloquent person for the most part.
mhm,
But I would get partway through a sentence and then have no idea what the next word was. And I could often remember where I was going, but I couldn't figure out how to get there from where I was. So there was fascinating things happening around language to do with brain fog,
mm,
certainly memory, that sense of everything just being kind of fuzzy. Um, Brain fog for me also really impacted my ability to do multi-step processes.
mm,
So the one that's lasted the longest, or one of the ones that's lasted the longest, because they're still here, um, was like cooking for myself. So this idea that you would find a recipe, go to the grocery store, buy all the things that you needed, get them home, you know, find all the tools that you needed, prep the stuff, cook the stuff, and then eat the stuff. Like that was way too many steps for me. That was just overwhelming.
mm,
And I really just started to do that about 2 weeks ago. I finally had a weekend where I was like, okay, I think I can do this. And I got 2 recipes I've cooked a million times, so I don't have to think really hard. Like, only needed a few things from the grocery store. So it's like, okay, I can manage the produce section, get these things. It actually took me 2 grocery trips to get everything because I forgot some stuff the first time. Anyway, which is kind of how brain fog works.
mm,
And then be able to get through the process. But I had to break it up over days. Like I did the grocery shopping during the week, knowing I was going to cook on the weekend. There's no way I could have like zipped to the grocery store that morning, grabbed the stuff, made that for dinner that night. That's still not there. But that sense that I have kind of scaffolded enough tools that I can break it apart. I can do it on over different days. That to me was a huge step, even though when I think about it, it's like, okay, I still have a way to go because I really should be able to zip to the grocery store, grab some stuff and cook dinner. And I'll get there. Um, Directions was a big one for me that came out of brain fog and kind of that loss of capacity. Like things that are easy become hard. And that loss of like the things that you did by routine. So having a shower is a great example. For most of us, showering is a routine thing that we do. And you probably haven't thought about it, but next time you have a shower, if you think about it, you'll realize you do it the same way every time.
mhm,
That's why it's fast. And I think that's why we have such great shower ideas because our brain can think about amazing creative things because we are just doing it by muscle memory, right?
mhm,
I remember standing in the shower and going, okay, what do I do here? Okay, I'm showering. Okay, so I need to do my hair. Okay, and so we're going to shampoo first. Okay, and like I had to walk myself through step by step. As a 50-something-year-old woman, I'd been doing this for a while. And you're still having to kind of break it down and go, okay. And like that 5-minute shower took 25. My daughter always reminds me of us making our first grilled cheese sandwich. So we were like, okay, we're going to cook for ourselves because we hadn't cooked for ourselves at all. Thank goodness for people who sent us DoorDash and Skip the Dishes and Uber Eats gift cards because that's what we lived on. Besides a piece of toast was about the extent of our ability. And we were like, okay, we could make a grilled cheese sandwich. It took us 45 minutes to make a grilled cheese sandwich because the getting of the bread, the finding of the mayo, you need to remember where the fry pan is. Like a grilled cheese sandwich is a pretty easy thing to do, but there's also a few steps. And we were just overwhelmed by having to try and like sequence things. So that
mm,
sequencing is super hard. Other symptoms people don't talk about: sleep disruption of both ends of the spectrum. I hear from people, they're sleeping too much, they're not sleeping enough. Either way, none of it is restful. So you're sleeping, even if you sleep for a really long time, you're still waking up exhausted because your body is not able to restore itself the same way it normally would. Disconnection from time. So that sense of time moving really quickly or really slowly, not knowing what day it is, all of that is super normal. And I think for me, because my loss happened during COVID, a lot of us were experiencing that kind of thing anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because our home has all of a sudden turned into our gym and our restaurant and our theater and our office, and we never leave it, right? And what day is it? Does it really matter? Right? So some of that disconnection from time was already happening, and then this just exacerbated it even more. A lot of people experience physical symptoms. So tingling in your extremities is quite normal, digestive issues, headaches, dry eyes. I had super dry eyes. I've never used eye drops before in my life, and I still have dry eye issues. And it, at the beginning, it's because you're crying all the time, and so the liquefaction of your eyes is all messed up. But as time passed, that still was an issue for me. Dry mouth, some of those things. And the other one for me that was really surprising was a sense of anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
So that sense that the way you thought your life was going to go has been all disrupted. And so what I hear from people all the time, and when I'm on forums or chats, people will often say, like, I worry all the time that something is going to happen to another loved one.
Hmm.
So even though you never worried before that something was going to happen, now that something has happened, you start to worry about what if something else happens. And I had that happen in a really intense way one day when I was having a good day, actually. It was one of the first days that I was kind of like, okay, like I can feel myself, and it was sunny, and I'd gone to the beach with the dog, and going down the stairs to the dog beach, I fell. And it ends up being a long dramatic story about how I broke my ankle. But the thing that's important for this conversation is that my immediate thought when my daughter didn't answer my text message instantly was that something had happened to her. And then I had let the dog go because we're at the dog beach now. So go run around. And then by the time I hobbled to kind of where I thought I would be able to see him, I couldn't see him. So the immediate thought is, oh my gosh, something's happened to the dog. Mm-hmm. So all these thoughts that I had never had before, like that was not part of how I lived my life, gratefully, all of a sudden are bombarding. And then I had a full-on panic attack. I've never had a panic attack before, ever. And I was like, on the log at the beach, like gasping for air, like tingly, and of course the dog is fine. The daughter is fine. Everything was fine, except my leg was broken. But all of the kind of thoughts that had gone to these extreme places was not something I had ever experienced before. And it comes from that sense of, your normal has been upended. And so if that can happen once, why couldn't it happen again? And I'm much more able to self-regulate that now. I'm at about the 2.5-year mark, just over 2.5 years since Ben died. So I'm able, it doesn't happen often anymore, but it still happens on occasion where if someone is late somewhere, I'm like, oh, I wonder if something, like my thought goes to, oh, I wonder if something has happened.
So could you help the listeners with your process on how you address that for yourself, how you were able to address the worry and the anxiety that ultimately, in this example, led to panic, because that can be incredibly overwhelming and really create isolation for those people where they don't want to leave the house. They're constantly obsessively communicating with their loved ones that are, walking with us. What things did you do to be able to soften that piece for you?
So I really had to lean into just a mantra to remind myself that I was okay. Like, in this moment, I am safe. In this moment, everything is fine. In this moment, I'm coping, right? Whatever you need to remind yourself, but that sense of mindfulness and being in this moment really helped. Because for me, that anxiety was all about spinning out to something that hadn't even happened yet and wasn't in this moment at all. So in this moment, even that, to get myself out of that kind of panic attack at the beach, I was like, okay, but in this moment, like, I'm okay. Yes, something is catastrophically wrong with my leg. And I'm not sure why my daughter's not answering her phone, which, her generation, they're supposed to be on their phone all the time. It's what drives us crazy about them. And so why isn't she answering me, right? there's the dog. Okay, so I'm okay. Something's wrong with my leg. That's real. She's off with her dad, so probably they're having lunch, and that's why she's not being rude at the table.
Mm.
And the dog is right there. And then if you can connect to what's happening in your environment, for me, that's also really grounding. You just need to kind of connect yourself with what's real.
Mm-hmm.
That for me is the key. Okay, so I'm at the beach. I'm sitting on a big log. My leg hurts, so I'm going to put it up. I can hear the waves. I can feel the wind. If you can engage your senses, that really helps with self-regulation, right? What do I smell? Oh, I smell the breeze. I smell the ocean. Oh, I love the smell of the ocean. I hear the dogs barking. I see the birds flying. Like if you could connect with what's real in your environment in that moment, even if it is, I'm safe at home and my four walls are keeping me here. I'm in my safe space. Outside my safe space, right? If you're feeling like that's constricting, then you can take a step outside that. So outside of my safe space is my beautiful garden. And that connects me with the world, right? Outside of my door is the sidewalk. And that takes me to other safe places where I can have my needs met. So that ability to kind of and you have to do it intentionally. Like for me, I could have sat in that spin until I heard back from her, but that was not going to help me in any way at all. So for me, that sense of, okay, what's in this moment? In this moment, what do I see? What do I smell? What do I hear? What can I touch? Where am I? What's real? What's real right now? And what are just my thoughts? And trying to disrupt that thinking pattern, that spin. It's almost like you have to slam the brakes on of that spin and go, oh, no, that's a spin. Okay, so how I get out of that is to connect with what's in this moment.
I love that. So just for a little recap, when some things people can look at and keep an eye on is the brain fog piece.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really glad that you went into a lot of detail on that because I think some of us are walking around in a sense of brain fog, not knowing
Yep.
what's going on. Like, why did I go to the store 3 different times?
Right? Yeah.
Where's the disconnect
Where are
between
my
the
keys?
two?
Like that's my regular. Like I wish there was a tag for my phone that could be answered by something else because that's the thing that's lost. So it being able to find all the other things, not helpful.
Right? So we've got brain fog, we've got sleep disruption. I liked that you went into the physiology, like the tingling
Yeah.
sensation that can happen with the digestive issues, that sense of anxiety and looping brain, and then a time disconnect. Is there anything else when we're looking at the anatomy of grief to give it a little bit of structure? Do you feel like that's pretty comprehensive?
I think that's pretty comprehensive. I think the thing that people need to know too is, you may have all or none of these things. Well, okay, let's be honest. You're going to have some of them to
Mm-hmm.
some level. The thing we don't know is how long they're going to last. And so part of my message is it's however long you think it is, it's way longer than that. So if you think it's days, it's months. If you know it's months, I'm here to tell you it's years, right? And I think that's the other disservice that we do to grievers is we have this weird story in our culture that somehow something is supposed to shift after you've had the service, whatever, if you're having a funeral or a celebration of life, some kind of gathering. That's supposed to be a big shift. Something magical is supposed to happen at a year. Once you've survived all those firsts, something magical is supposed to happen. For a lot of people, the second year is worse. And I think it's because we've been fed this story that the first year is the worst. So we kind of steel ourselves and we go, okay, so all of the firsts are going to be hard. So we kind of prepare ourselves for them. And then if we buy into that story, we expect the second ones to be better. And then when they're not, they feel worse than the first ones did.
Mm.
So a lot of people find the second year actually harder. I found the second year just stranger, if that makes sense. I don't know that I would, harder and easier is kind of difficult language around grief because it just is. Some days impossible, some days not as terrible, but it all lasts longer than you think. So I just think it's really important for people to be aware, even months or years afterwards, especially if there's an activating incident. Like if something happens that, acutely reminds you of your person or makes you really long for them, even years down the road, to just be aware that if some of those things start to happen, that, oh, that's that grief bubbling up again. Like the grief never goes away altogether. That's the other disservice we do people, is this sense that like, you're going to get through it, you're going to move on, whatever it is. That never happens, right? And I think we sometimes get stuck in grief because we resist that notion that we're going to move on from our loved one, because we don't want to move on from them. We want to keep them with us. So if we can shift that idea to trying to learn how to move on with your loss and with your loved one, then when the grief comes up, months or years later, we're still attuned to it maybe being about grief. And we're not pretending that the grief has ended whenever society told us it was supposed to, because society was wrong. So we just have to let all of that go. Like all the stories we've been told are not helpful for the most part. And then we're left kind of having to construct it for ourselves. So that's why I think these conversations are so important, because people can hear that, what they're experiencing isn't outrageously off the mark. It's really what really happens. We just don't talk about the reality. So then you're left feeling like an oddity and alone, and like you don't really want to talk about it because something must be wrong with you.
You're not doing it right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I find that so fascinating with grief, right? It's this topic that we don't want to talk about, which means none of us really know how to do it. And none of us really know how to support each other when it's happening, but we hold a whole lot of judgment about it, which is such a weird situation. Because usually if we have judgment about something, it's because there are very clear rules and definitions about how it's supposed to go. And those might be bollocks, like they might just be complete malarkey, but we kind of have this shared understanding of things because we've talked about them and we've probably gossiped about them and we've been judgy together about them, right? But with grief, it's like we don't even want to talk about it, but we have all kinds of ideas about how you should do it and how long it should take, mostly because we are wildly uncomfortable with your grief. And so we would like you to move on quickly so that we can again feel comfortable. And that's the paradigm we need to upend, because we need to all be comfortable with grief so that when it's happening, when someone is experiencing it, we can support them and they don't feel alone and isolated. And as you were saying, in a point where their anxiety, because they feel so like an oddball and so like what is happening to them is wrong somehow, then they're isolated and then they're in their house and then you're like the spin just gets worse and worse and worse, and the secondary losses mount and mount and mount and mount. And we can disrupt all of that if we can all just embrace that it's going to be messy and we're going to make mistakes, and that's all okay.
I think going back to what you said, that we're uncomfortable with the other person's grief process, but I think that just inherently means that we're uncomfortable with our own disconnection from our own grief process. And it's really important to understand. We've been talking about this with the context of losing a loved one, but grief really shows its face in many different areas of shifting life expectations. This isn't what I thought life was going to be. This isn't what my plan was.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about where people might see grief show up in their life outside of kind of the familiar context of losing a loved one or even a furry pet?
Yeah. And that part to me is part of what's so fascinating, is I think we are grieving all kinds of things all the time. We should be. And kind of our physiology and our psychology kind of demands it of us. But if we're not acknowledging it and we're not talking about it, then it's all getting stuffed. I say, we're just all stuffing it into a backpack that's just getting heavier and heavier and heavier. And eventually it will explode somehow. And I think a lot of what we're seeing right now, where people are lashing out so much at each other, is that explosion, right? So I think we need to be grieving every loss that we have. And it's not all going to be you're not going to have a big grief experience, but losses of loved ones, we expect people to grieve that. Furry loved ones as well, right? Or scaly loved ones or whatever. Animal loved ones as well. Feathered loved ones, I don't know. But what we don't talk about is, what about when you lose a job? What about when you lose a friendship? What about in cases of divorce? Like, that's something to be grieved. You've lost a marriage, you've lost a family structure, you've lost how you envisioned your life would go. I think especially right now, having, we're now at the 3-year mark with COVID, we all have lots of losses that we're grieving that we're not talking about. And I think that it's because we feel guilty somehow having a bunch of emotions about something that shouldn't be a big deal compared to someone else's losses. So this comparative
Ooh.
situation that doesn't serve anybody, right? Because then it means that we're just all in a mess. So if we can stop comparing, I think we need to be grieving lost graduations, lost weddings, lost dance competitions. Like I think about the year my daughter graduated and like what a big deal those final dance competitions were with like the kids that she'd been competing with since she was 7. Like those are big deal moments, graduations from college or university, changes of jobs. So many people lost even if you are in the same job, you lost how that job works. So you lost probably going to the office, which means you lost all your collegial connections, right? Maybe they're not friends because you don't see them outside of work, but
Mhm.
they're still people you're connected with and that you riff off of in the coffee room and have a little chit chat with and influence your life, right? We lost all of that. We somehow everybody I knew was going on vacation. Everybody lost a vacation. And none of us are talking about how mad we still are that we didn't get to go on that vacation. But it's okay to grieve those losses, right? You might have had tickets for something. Maybe you were looking forward to a concert. Maybe you love going to museums. Like for so many people during COVID, the way they fed their soul got lost. So
Mhm.
whether it's through museums or music or going to shows or going to church or pottery class or choir or band or whatever it was, pickleball or square dancing or yoga, I don't care, whatever you used to go to that fed you and filled your cup back up, we lost all of that. And so yes, now we're able to get it back, and for the most part we're able to go all of those places and do most of those things, but they don't feel the same to most of us. They feel a little bit different. And maybe that's because we haven't grieved that we lost them in the first place.
I think you touched on something really important is that judgment of my loss isn't enough to justify falling apart or feeling like I'm falling apart or feel
Yeah.
like I can't get out of bed or feel like because it doesn't have the same cultural levity or permission. I've seen that with a lot of my clients. And what's interesting is the connection between when we start talking and they start realizing how deep that grief is. And then when we were talking earlier about the connection to brain fog, I see it a lot more in women for some reason with
Mhm.
this deep like this it's something I can tell something is wrong, and as soon as they start pivoting towards it, it's like this deep well of grief. And those same women have really struggled with this brain fog, and for you to be able to put those two together was like mind blowing because we're attributing our symptomology, every one of those symptomology we can attribute to, oh, I'm just stressed out. Okay, well, yeah, that's part of it, but there's something really powerful about grief and transformational about grief and giving it the front and center stage that it deserves and it needs.
Mhm.
How can we then, once we realize and we accept that we have these deep reserves of grief that at this point are getting stagnant in people and
Mhm.
starting to go into something like complex grief is what we call it,
Yeah.
but it becomes very toxic. And then I think a really dangerous thing is people start accepting this is just this. I hear it everywhere. This is just the new way of living. This is just the new normal. And I completely disagree that it doesn't have to be that way. Can
No.
you guide us through the process of how to digest that grief and how to use it as a catalyst for profound healing and transformation?
Yes. So, what's so interesting to me about grief is when you, as you say, if you start to look at it and you stop shying away,
Hmm.
most of us are carrying a really deep well
Hmm.
full of it because we're not taught how to accept it, how to examine it, how to hold some curiosity about it. We're just taught to get over it and move on and rub some dirt on it, right? Get back in the game, right? And so when you see that how deep the well is, that can sometimes feel overwhelming. But I think you're exactly right. I think so much of the symptomology that we're seeing right now, so widespread, a lot of it has to do with grief. So what I would say to someone who's having that realization that that might be part of what's going on for them, to me, the first step is to get really in touch with those emotions. So breaking up the paradigm of there's acceptable emotions and not acceptable emotions, there's positive and negative emotions. Part of the issue with grief is the emotions that you feel are disproportionately on the negative bad side of those kinds of lists. And I think that's another reason we shy away from it, because if we really look at those emotions, they're all the ones that we've been told since we were little to get over, right? You're supposed to be happy. You're not supposed to be angry, right? You're supposed to be playful. You're not supposed to be disturbed, right? So you can do a quick Google search of an emotion wheel. There's tons of them. They're all great. I don't need to make one. There's millions. They're pretty colors. Use that really to get past that mad, sad, glad trifecta, because that's not deep enough. So you're not going to be able to dig in and start to feel it, to heal it, if you can't name it first. So to me, that's really the first step, is to go, okay, but what is this emotion? Yes, I feel mad. Okay, but what's underneath that? Oh, what's underneath that is disappointment. Well, what's under that? Oh, what's under that is frustration. What's under that? And to dig in. And what I like about those wheels is most of them are kind of structured to help you go in, like, towards the center, right? Because I feel like we need to get into the core. So if you're someone who has kind of lived in that mad, sad, glad place and you need some better languaging, that's a super place to start. Because until you can really name what's going on, it's super hard to get through it or past it or process it, or, however you name that experience for yourself. And that for me was absolutely one of the first things I had to do. I had to just accept that this tsunami of emotions was actually healthy, that every one of them was healthy. There wasn't anything bad about them. Why wouldn't I expect them? Like, we should expect them. Like, when we're prepared to look at something that's disappointed us or changed our life in a way we didn't want it changed, we should be okay with them not being ones that we're particularly happy about, right? And normalizing that those emotions are welcome too is a huge step, right? We don't just welcome happiness and joyfulness, and I can't even think of all the good ones, right? But there's a whole big list, gratitude, right? All that good stuff. And those are super important. I'm not dissing all the good emotions, but because we want to ignore the bad ones, that's why we get stuck with this big backpack full of grief. Because it's a backpack full of those emotions that we've been taught to ignore. So embracing those emotions is the first step, really digging into naming them and allowing yourself to feel them. And then looking at what you need. Like, what do you need? I do a great exercise that comes from the training and work I've done with Claire Zammit, who's the founder of Feminine Power. And she does a really great feelings and needs exercise. And you basically ask yourself, it's all internal, so you don't have to share any of it with anybody. You're just doing it with yourself. You ask yourself 3 times what you feel, and then you just acknowledge it back. So something like, Suzanne, what do you feel? Oh, right now I'm feeling good emotions, but so I feel grateful. I hear that you feel grateful. So you're just acknowledging, just mirroring back 3 times, because that helps you get past, like, what's under. And then the 4th question is, what do you need? Oh, I need a cup of tea. I need a bath. I need to go walk outside. I need to talk to somebody. I need someone to hear me. I need to scream into a pillow and break plates at a crash room, right? Whatever it is. But then you can get to what's going on and how you could start to heal it. And I think the transformational part is so interesting to me. Grief, when it happens in a catastrophic way, when it's around a loved one, a big loss, brings up all the other losses, right? So all the old wounds come out to play. Isn't that fun? You're already overwhelmed, and here come all the old wounds as well. And the ones that come are the ones that aren't healed yet, right? So you have this opportunity to look at those as well and look at them all in concert with each other. And what I knew, with the death of my parents was the same. I knew these losses were going to change my life. Obviously, my life is going to be different when my dad has died or when my mom has died. Now, especially when my son has died. And so to me, if my life was going to be changed, I wanted to have a voice in that. Like, I have a huge stake in what happens afterwards. I want to have a voice in what happens afterwards too. So that for me then became about, okay, so how do I use this experience that I didn't choose, that I never wanted, but that I have anyways, that I would give away in a heartbeat to have Ben back? None of that is real. I've got it. It's here. So how do I, if that's the reality, use it as a catalyst to make something that serves me better, that's more truly me, that's more authentic, that's more meaningful, that's more all the things? Because I didn't want my life to get smaller. So then the only option is for it to get bigger. And how do I do that on purpose? Because I didn't want it to be by accident or by someone else's design. I wanted to be a co-creator of that.
I think you're also in that point completely shifting a mindset of life happening to me, and I am a byproduct of the things that happen to me, which is also known as like contextualized under victim
Yep.
mindset. And then into more of a growth mindset where I love one of my favorite words is co-creator, is being able to look at the situation and even possibly think, okay, life is working with me, that I'm working with life as a co-creator on what I get to choose on the other side of this.
Yeah. And I get to choose and co-create how it is in the moment. Like, even in those very early days where you're in full on survival mode, I still got to make choices. Like, we're making choices all day, every day. And if we can make them more consciously, so this to me was the conscious part of conscious and curious. How do I consciously choose in this moment what I'm going to focus on? And in those early days, honest to goodness, Rebecca, it really was like, how am I going to breathe? And I had read this great book called Burnout, which had a process for like when you're in sobbing and how to like break that up and be able to breathe again. So I was like, oh, I remember this exercise. I heard them on Brene Brown's podcast. I remember how to do this. Excellent. And I remember saying to one of Ben's really close friends, because she was like, I don't know, I just keep crying and I can't breathe. And I'm like, okay, you have to try this weird exercise. Just try it and see if it works for you. So it was those kinds of things. And that was that consciousness about like, how do I allow it to all be okay, even when what it is horrifyingly terrible? And to get okay with that was okay. Why should I expect it to be anything different? It should be.
Is it okay? Or I think that word can get sticky for people.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you say it's okay, that means that, because sometimes the passing of somebody, for example, can be absolutely horrific
Mm-hmm.
in the way it happens and
Yep.
doesn't feel fair. But I
Yep.
wonder if okay can also be internalized as accept, like the
Yeah.
acceptance of that this is literally just what happened, and
Yeah.
it's acceptance is a little more digestible, I think.
Yeah, and it's so interesting that you say that, because that's 100% how I use it for myself. Like, it's not that, oh, I'm okay with all of this. It's that this is okay. That I'm accepting it. It just is. And so if this is, then what? And that's where that curiosity comes into place, right? That growth mindset. And I had been living in a growth mindset purposefully for quite some years. So it wasn't that I was trying to learn how to do that in those early acute days where all you want to do is breathe, right? But in those early acute days where all you want to do is breathe, then I still was holding that curiosity about, okay, like, what tools do I have in my toolbox? What do I know? Oh, wait, like, I heard that exercise, I don't even know how long before. And okay, let's try that. Maybe it actually works. Who knows? Maybe they were right. And it did. So it was another way to kind of reset and go, okay, so like, I have to oxygenate this body. How am I going to do that when what I want to do is lie sobbing on the couch? Because this reality is so unfathomable. And so, the cognitive dissonance in the beginning is so massive that, you just have to kind of hold it all. And I think the other thing that I said to my daughter in the very early days was that we were going to become expert at holding paradox.
Ooh.
Because grief is a lot about holding paradox, right? We are so grateful that people are coming to visit us and so devastated that the reason they're coming is because Ben has died, right? We're so grateful that people are showing up for us and helping us because we desperately need it, but we only need it because, Ben has died. Like, we're so happy we have each other in this moment, but we're clinging on to each other for dear life because. So it's that holding paradox. It's all a both and I think for people who are starting to look at how much grief they're carrying, that's the other thing to really embrace. It's a both and. It's not an either or. You can be happy and sad in the same instant. You can be joyful and devastated at the same time. And so if you can really lean into the both and of it all, that for me really helped with the spin in the head of like, how do I make sense of this? Because it's not just one thing. It's not linear. It's not one thing at a time. It's not any of that. So if you're like me, sort of an A+ student at, get in, figure out the problem, make a plan, execute the plan, be done, like none of those skills work. They don't help at all. So for me, those were some of the puzzle pieces that I left there 2.5 years ago on the ground somewhere. I don't even pretend to play that way anymore because it doesn't serve me. It's all about holding that duality of everything.
And what I noticed a lot of people doing is not giving themselves permission to the judgment and criticism come up. How can I feel happiness and such sadness at the same time? And then they don't allow themselves to have that paradox and forget to eventually add back the happiness. That it becomes literally years later where it's I forgot to be happy, or I'm not allowed to be happy, because if I'm happy, that means that I'm saying this was okay. Like people can really get stuck around that, and being able to hold that paradox. And it's like when the two come together, there becomes a sweetness. It's like it has a little baby of emotional experience where when you hold that happiness and that deep sadness at the same time, there's a river of sweetness in the middle.
Yeah. And I think, if we're only going to be allowed to have one emotion, then somehow we feel like the emotion that honors our loved one is sadness or despair or those kinds of emotions to varying degrees. But then we're also holding our memories of them and all the wonderful things that they were and that they meant to us. And so if you're only going to allow yourself one thing, it's impossible to allow that one thing to be happiness. Right? Does that make sense? So if you're only going to be one, you're always going to be sad. So you have to start to open up that space for what can you be like sad and what? Because you're going to hold that sadness for a really long time. Like, I don't know how long yet because I still am. And when I think about it, my dad died over 20 years ago now. I'm still sad he died. So if I'm going to feel sad about it for 20 years, I don't want to only feel sad. So you have to start to break that up and break it open and allow, little tastes, little bits, the sadness and something else, the sadness and hope, the sadness and growth, the sadness and possibility. Otherwise, you're just stuck in sadness. And then what? I don't know. For me, that just wasn't a possibility that I wanted to explore, because that's not the life that I wanted for myself. And it's not the life, that for me, because I know there's people and that's where they are, and that's also okay. Right? Because for me, this is completely a no judgment situation. However you are getting through your day that's serving you, excellent. Continue. And, start to expand, start to broaden if that serves you. For me, I knew living a life that was constricted by feeling so sad was not what I wanted to be my reality going forward. So
Yes.
I hold the sadness, and because I'm not denying the sadness either. The sadness is still there. The sadness is deep and, you know, unfathomable in many moments of the day. And if I could talk about it and share about it and let someone else hear that it's normal and it's all right and they can accept it, then it serves a purpose.
Hmm. Can you touch on just briefly the roadblock a lot of people have on when they see somebody suffering in that deep sadness and that knowing it's grief? What, in your perspective, is the best way to show up and support those? Because I think a lot of people want to, but they drop the casserole and run, or they like, I don't want to, if they even get to the door with the casserole. So, what would be some suggestions as people are listening to this, and just kind of a guidebook of how do I support my friend that I don't even know where to start? I want to, and most people try to go into fix mode, like what you were talking about, and none of that is helpful.
Nope, none of it works. And we're all so good at it. Darn it. I wish it worked, but it doesn't. So, it's the same things we're talking about for the griever really apply to the support person too. You have to get yourself to a space where you're comfortable with the messy. And really, the best people, the best support is honest, it's vulnerable. And if you're terrified, it's okay to say, I am so scared I'm going to do the wrong thing, but I don't want to do nothing. So I'm here anyways, and let's figure it out together.
Hmm.
Right? What if you started somewhere like that? It's open. We're just going to figure it out. None of it, there's no playbook, right? This is this universal experience that we're all going to face. It's going to be different every time for every person. So even though I had, been through the death of my dad and the death of my mom, the death of Ben was a whole new ball game. So it's going to be different every time. So even if you've supported this person once and you're like, oh, I've done this once with them, I know exactly what to do, you don't, because it's going to be different. So showing up just authentically, vulnerably, and I know none of us want to hear this. We all want to hear, excellent, I heard a podcast and she had the exactly right thing to say, but there isn't, unfortunately. And we all kind of have this intuitive knowing that the things that we've heard said over and over and over again are not helpful. And you're right. So trust your intuition. I lightheartedly say, if you heard your Aunt Mildred say it to your mom at your grandma's funeral, you probably shouldn't say it, right? All those old cliches and platitudes, we just need to write them all down and have a burning and let them go. And really just show up as you, right? Vulnerable, open. I don't know what to say. There are no right words and I can't fix this. And this is terrible. It's okay to acknowledge that it's terrible. The person who's grieving knows that. So if someone acknowledges that that's probably what's real, that's a real gift to feel that, mirrored back to you and hear that someone else is thinking that too. Then you're not isolated anymore, right? Then you're not all alone because someone else is feeling it too. So sharing really what's going on for you. I do an exercise when I'm doing a workshop for people supporting someone who's grieving or who want to practice ahead of time. Because wouldn't that be exciting if we practiced ahead of time? On those littler losses we were talking about. So when the big catastrophic ones come, we've at least awkwardly said something a few times. And what I get people to do is do a visioning of a person they have supported in the past that maybe they still carry some guilt, because there's a whole cycle of fear, shame, and guilt that happens when we're trying to support someone and we don't feel like we did a good job. So one of those times that you're still holding and thinking, oh, I didn't do that very well. And so with this new mindset of I'm just going to be open and vulnerable and honest, what would you have said to them? And the things people come up with are astonishingly beautiful and would feel like a safe harbor to someone who's grieving. Because when you're speaking from the heart and when you're offering to help figure it out or just sit with them on the couch while they cry and just be there, then they're not alone. And then what's happening to them isn't weird or unusual or something that should be a secret, right? If we're in it together, and we're building connection, then it's easier. It's more easeful for everyone. Even in the hardest, darkest days, it's easier for everyone. So really speaking from the heart, showing up for people much longer than you think they need your support. I didn't do my own grocery shopping for like, I don't know, a year and a half, something like that. And then I finally got to the point where I could buy smoothie ingredients. We still just have the same smoothie all the time. So I could get blueberries, bananas, spinach, and oat milk. Yay for me. And hemp seed when I remembered it, which was not every time. Right. But I could make sure that we had those 5 things all the time in the house. So they need support much longer than you think, with the emotional piece and the practical pieces. So the place most people get stuck is in fear. So if I do a survey or a questionnaire, or I'm asking people, what happened, it's about 95%. Like, it's astronomically, that's the thing. We're scared we're going to do harm, right? We don't want to hurt anybody. We don't want to make it worse. So we end up not doing anything because we're scared of doing the wrong thing. And then time passes, and then it's even more awkward. And then we've done nothing. And now what the heck do we do, right? If we can just embrace that awkward at the beginning and know that it's going to be messy, and we're not going to get it perfect, and that's okay. We can be brilliant and imperfect at the same time. Then we can show up for each other, and we can support each other for the long haul, because this is a long haul process. Grievers hear over and over again, and so many people said it to me, let me know if there's anything I can do, or anything you need, I'm here for you. In those early days with that brain fog, you cannot conceptualize what it is you might need in that abstract kind of way. So on the emotional side, you need all open-endedness. On the practical side, you need yes, no questions. Do you need milk? I could answer that question. Or, I'm going to the grocery store, go open your fridge and tell me what you need and I'll bring it. Right? Super practical, super specific. All those things that you're doing on a day-to-day basis have become almost impossible for someone in those early days of grief. So if it's about childcare or puppy care or groceries, somebody was telling me the other day, someone angel showed up in their life and did their laundry. Like, she would come and pick it up and take it home and wash it and dry it and fold it and bring it back. Like, that is a huge gift. I was thinking about that today when I was walking the dog. And I think our answer to laundry is we just bought more socks and underwear. I don't even know how long it took us to do laundry. I have a specific memory of us being like, oh yeah, we're just going to need more underwear. Like, that's just a thing, because we all have enough clothes, but just buy more underwear. It works great. But that sense of the really practical things, right? Maybe it's a neighbor that you don't know all that well, but you know when garbage day is. So what if you knocked on their door and said, hey, you know what? It's garbage day on Thursdays. How about if I just go into your backyard when I'm putting my garbage out and take yours out for you too? Would that be helpful? Always asking permission. Is this helpful? With a really specific offer. If it's something you love to do, that's even better. I had friends who I knew loved to cook, and bless them, they said, can you send me 3 recipes and I'm going to make it for you and bring it? Right? So we've kind of moved on from anybody wanting a stack of Pyrex dishes with some kind of mysterious casserole with breadcrumbs on top and tinfoil. Like, we're kind of past that. But eating is a thing, right? And it's hard, and it's one of the physiological things that gets all messed up. So, what support do you need to be able to eat? Oh, I don't, that's even too broad. I'm like, yeah, I don't know. What do you feel like eating today? Can I go pick it up for you? That's a good question, right? So the more you can specify it, the more immediate it is too. Is really great for grievers when we're talking about that disruption of time. Like, what do I need tomorrow? I don't know. I don't know what I need 3 hours from now. What do I need right now? Is there something you need right now? No, I'm good. Or, oh my gosh, yes. But a really specific offer, can I bring you a coffee? What kind do you want?
That's really good advice. It's really good advice. Well, can you tell us a little bit about how do you, having gone through this process, how do you work with people on their journey through grief?
So when I'm working with grievers, I do that all one-on-one. For me, the idea of going to some group that was all going to sit and talk about what had happened to them felt overwhelming. I just could not wrap my head around that being helpful. And I don't say that to dissuade anybody from having that experience. If that feels like it would serve you, please go. There are amazing support groups for all kinds of losses. There are ones that are led by peers who've been through the kind of loss that you're experiencing. Like there's all kinds of great groups. So I don't say that to say, oh, never do a group. For me personally, I do it one-on-one. And really, I do it that way because it's so unique. And that way it takes a whole bunch of the self-judgment out. Because I felt like if I was going to be sitting in a group, I would somehow get the sense, and this was all my decision, like I would have this sense that somehow I had to perform something somehow. And
Mm-hmm.
also the thought of going in a group of people and having to talk to more than one person at a time for me was overwhelming at the beginning. I couldn't manage that at all. I also do one-on-one because everybody's speed is different. Everybody's, what they're facing at any time is different. And so if we're doing one-on-one, then there's just no judgment about it. And you just get to have your experience be acceptable and be, okay, like it's fine. What is real is fine. We need to get to acceptance. And for me, the goal is integration. I don't ever want anyone to feel like you're supposed to move on from or get through this or leave your person behind. We're going to integrate this into our lives. It becomes a part of us, right? This gaping hole becomes a part of us. It's a part of who we are. And so, how do you build a life that acknowledges that carries your person with you, where you have maybe some rituals that you do at certain times of the year or in certain places or certain activities that connect you with your person? Because we don't want to leave them behind. So, how can you, for you and that person or the multiple people, because a lot of the time, I always think of that brilliant Maya Angelou quote that, when we know better, we do better. And
Mm-hmm.
so maybe in this grief, you're also re experiencing a whole bunch of the ones that you didn't do as well as you want to do it this time. So that all kind of comes back too. So sometimes you're also, you're having this major grief, but then it's also reminding you of these other ones. You can only grieve one person at a time. So you have to pick which one and do that one and then do the next one and then do the next one. You can't do them all at once. It's just doesn't work. So really it's a lot about mindfulness. It's a lot about feeling those feelings, connecting and building a really great relationship with yourself. So the pillars for me are your relationship with yourself, your relationship with life, because our relationship with life and how we think it's supposed to work and how we think it was unfolding, whatever your belief system is about that, whether it's the universe or God or Buddha or whoever, that relationship with that life that's bigger than us gets disrupted. And for a lot of people, they lose faith, they lose their belief that anything is supporting them. So reconnecting with that and then reconnecting and rebuilding how you interact with others. One of the common things that's just acknowledged in the grief space is that grief will change your address book. So people you thought you could rely on disappear. It happened to me. It happens to everybody. That's part for me why my passion is helping people support each other better, because I don't think it needs to be that way. But for now, that's often what happens.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you then rebuild your connection with other people, with the people you counted on and didn't show up, or with people you didn't know before who now are your people? How do you build that connection and build belief that that is there to sustain you as well? So that's kind of the three pillars. And then just allowing those emotions, really digging into the naming of what's real and allowing what's real to be acceptable
Mm-hmm.
and not permanent, right? What's real in this moment isn't permanent in another moment, but it is right now. And so that's okay. And then what comes next, we'll deal with what comes next when it comes.
Mm. I love that you work one on one because the experience is so uniquely individual, and what it can bring up, the growth process, but also what it brings up can surprise you. And
Mm-hmm.
the entire time that we've been talking, I keep thinking of the word midwife and to
Mm.
being a midwife for the grief process. And that to me really resonates with what you do, because it can be a very lonely and scary place. And to have someone to help walk with you that's not only been through it, but provide some structure to understand what is happening so you can lean into the transformational process.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That's beautifully put. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, Susan, thank you so much for just taking the time and being open on sharing all of the all of the deliciousness that you did today. And will you tell everybody just briefly before we take off about
Yeah.
your the handout that you made that people can snag off your website? They'll also be in the show notes.
Yeah. So because we had talked about, or we knew we wanted to talk about the symptoms of grief, I just made a little infogram. So it's super simple. One of the things for me is I still struggle with is reading really dense, complicated things. So it's not that at all. Just kind of highlighting 8 of the really common things that we talked about towards the beginning. So yeah, you can grab that off the website and print it, distribute it, pass it. If you're grieving, pass it out to friends. This is what I'm dealing with. Right? Read
Yes.
and learn. These are all the things I need you to help me with because I don't know what time it is and I can't do sequential processing and I don't know how to get groceries. And could you do my laundry? So all of the, to just really normalize it. Because if we talked about it, it would be less isolating. We would feel less scared. We would feel less like we don't understand what's happening to us because whatever you're feeling has probably been felt and experienced by someone else who was grieving. So, in a different way, it's uniquely yours. And there are these shared things that are likely to happen that, if we can normalize them, feel way less scary.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, again, thank you so much for being here and taking the time. It was an absolute pleasure.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for opening up this space. It's such an important conversation, and I'm really thrilled we get to share it with your audience. Thank you so much.
What a conversation. I hope this was not only helpful and insightful, but provided a roadmap of sorts to the grief process. I think it is important to remember that we all go through grief in our lives, and none of us are alone in this process, but it certainly can feel that way sometimes. Make sure to download the handout that Susan has made for you by following the link in the episode notes. Grief can look different for different people, and sometimes we just don't notice random symptoms popping up that were never there before, but hadn't necessarily associated the symptoms with the grief process. I know for myself, brain fog was a big aha moment for not only myself, but my clients as well. If you are on YouTube, you're going to love the next video. If you're listening on a podcast, it is episode 12 with Stepanka Kurlava on emotional alchemy and living a more textured life, diving into the language of emotions and ways to translate what they are trying to share with us. And as always, may you be the change you want to see in the world.